Hey, my name is Loriano Andrade Vicente. I'm with the MCAT Disciples, and today I'm going to be telling you all about the MCAT exam. But before I do that, I should tell you a little bit about myself and a little bit about our company here, the MCAT Disciples. So I spent my undergraduate year at Stony Brook University. In 2016, I graduated with a degree in biochemistry. In 2016, I also took the MCAT, in which I scored in the 97th percentile, or 518, on the MCAT. I am currently a medical student at the Warren Alpert Medical School at Brown University. I'm also the owner and main lecturer for the MCAT Disciples, which brings us to our next point here. Our company provides everything that you can expect from your typical MCAT prep company, but there are two things that we really do that is relatively unique. The first is that with every student who purchases our online course, which is our premier course, receives 30 hours of one-on-one private MCAT prep. One-on-one. You won't get that anywhere near from any other company near the price that we market at, which is at $1,000 currently today. The second thing that we do is that is unique is that instead of giving you these content videos that are 10 minutes and they aren't integrative and they're like a million that you have to watch, what we do is we provide traditional style lectures, okay? 90-minute lecture that will contain every single thing that you need to know for the MCAT topics in which it's covering. It'll review within the lecture, okay? It'll make sure that we repeat and emphasize all the topics that need to be emphasized and de-emphasize the topics that don't need to be emphasized, okay? Those are the two things that really make us unique, and I encourage you to check out our website and check out what we have to offer. Check out our trial videos, check out some of our videos on YouTube, okay? I think you'd really be happy with our course. I think the results speak for themselves. Right now we have an average MCAT score of the 89th percentile, or 512, so, check it out. But anyway, let's get into the lecture today. So here's what we're going to be going through. What is the MCAT? What does that acronym even stand for? What is a good score? What is tested? What is test day like? Why do so many people fail? And how should you prepare? So we'll start with this. The MCAT is a 7.5-hour passage-based multiple choice exam directed towards measuring the intellectual abilities and the preparedness of U.S. medical school applicants. Essentially, this test is going to test whether or not you're intelligent enough to become a physician. And then secondly, whether or not you're willing to put in the effort required to become a physician, whether or not you're going to make this your priority, whether or not you're going to make being intelligent enough and being smart enough and having enough information to be able to be in charge of somebody else's life. It's a hard exam. It's going to be the hardest test you've taken in your undergraduate career. That is 100% sure it's going to be 100% different than what you've been used to. Way harder, way broader, way longer of a test, okay? Nothing like what you did in undergrad. So what's a good score? We should talk about the scale of the scoring system and what's a good score. There are 4 sections on the MCAT exam. In each section, it is possible to score between a 118 and a 132. All right? It's 4 sections, so if you add up those 4 sections, the possible score you have is 472 and 528. This confuses people. And the reason it's rather confusing is because of the fact that those numbers mean absolutely nothing to you at this point. It's interesting because you can actually sit down for the MCAT. Remember the medical college admissions test, okay? The MCAT. You can sit down for that exam and not answer a single question and get a 472. Very interesting that way. It's actually a ranked exam, so these numbers will actually have some meaning to you in the next slide. So again, you can get from a 472 to a 528. 472 being associated with the first percentile and 528 being associated with the 100th percentile. It's interesting, in fact, that you can actually get some things wrong on the MCAT and still get a so-called perfect score. And that's because it's a ranked exam. There's no really absolute numbers. What they do is you take the exam, and then they'll compare everyone who took the same exact exam as you and say, okay, whoever did the best gets 528. Whoever, someone did in the middle get around 500. Someone who did the worst get 472. So that's it's a ranked scale, okay? So what does the percentile mean? I'm not going to give you a true definition of a percentile because it won't make any sense to you, but I'll tell you functionally what a percentile means. So let's say you scored in the 50th percentile, you scored a 500. That means that you scored either the same or better than 50% of the people who took the exam. I'll give you another example. Let's say you scored in the 90th percentile. That means that you scored either the same or better than 90% of the people who took the exam. Another way of saying that is saying that you're in the top 10% in the nation. Again, this is nationwide, and that's the other thing that I really love about the MCAT. There are so many different colleges on the earth today, okay? And in every one of those colleges, there are people there with 4.0, there are people there with 3.0s, but you can't really get a sense of how smart or intelligent or how hardworking that person really is based on their GPA, because it's not standardized. But this is standardized. Everybody takes this test, okay? And it's ranked. So it's an amazing way for you to separate yourself from the pack, and you need to think about it that way as you're preparing, that this is a moment for you to shine. And if you think about it that way, you're more likely to do well and be more motivated to do well, at least in my case. I'm sure I was. Because I view this as an opportunity to really set myself apart from other people. But that's a scoring system. Okay? So really what a good MCAT score, then you know what, why don't we head back to the last slide. What a good MCAT score is really relative notion. I would say general percentiles, I would say 90th percentile or better, it's around 513, 514 total score, would be a good MCAT score, a competitive MCAT score. You'd be getting a lot of interviews at a lot of medical schools with that kind of MCAT score. 90th percentile. You're in the top 10% of the world for that year. But there are other ways of defining a good MCAT score. You can do it by ethnicity. So it turns out that you can look at the matriculant data and then determine what a good score is. So this is for the last year that just passed, okay? The average cumulative GPA and MCAT for a white matriculant into medical school was actually 510 and 3.6. Essentially the same for Asians. And then for blacks and Latinos, what a good score was, well, a score that was good enough essentially to get you into medical school with around a 503 and a 3.3, 3.35 GPA. Okay? There's a big discrepancy there, isn't there? I really don't want to get into it. I don't really want to get into why there's the discrepancy between the score that you need to get into medical school as a black and Latino and the score you need to get into medical school as a white or an Asian. Really don't. Let's just suffice it to say that there are typically African American and Latinos that are disadvantaged in society. And these disadvantages ultimately culminate into them not being able to reach their full potential. And so a way to combat this is to allow them to enter medical school with these lower GPAs and with these lower MCAT scores, and then train them up to their full potential. Train them up to a place where they can perform at the level of their white and Asian counterparts. So that's the idea. But I don't really want to get into an argument about that. Let's leave it at that. So what a good score can depend on your ethnicity, right? It can also depend on where you want to go. You can base what a good score is depending on where you want to go. So I have a few examples here for you. Harvard Medical School, the average MCAT score for the matriculants this year was a 517 or 95th percentile. For Yale, you're looking at 517 or 95th percentile. For the Warren Alpert Medical School at Brown University, the school that I go to, you're looking at a 515 or the 93rd percentile with the average MCAT score for this year for people that entered the medical school this year. So again, how you define a good score is relative, right, to what your goals are and what you're looking to do with it. So what is tested on the MCAT? So it's broken up into 4 sections. You got biology and biochemistry, chemistry and physics, psychology and sociology. You're talking CARS, okay, critical analysis and reasoning skills. So the CARS section is actually just essentially an English section. It's about reading a passage by some author and then doing some questions based on that passage. So what did the author mean when he said this? What conclusions can you make about what the author stated in the passages? What conclusions were correct that the author made based on what he presented on the passage? Things like that. That's what CARS is all about. In terms of the other 3 sections, all right, there are some content that you need to know before taking the MCAT test. In fact, you essentially need to know the first year general biology, first year of general chemistry, a bit of organic chemistry, not too much on orgo, thankfully. First year physics, okay? First year introductory psychology, first year introductory sociology, first semester biochemistry, and some mathematical concepts such as algebra 1 and 2, trig, probability statistics, okay? Estimations, square roots. Now, they're the more in-depth, you can, very generally, this is what's on the MCAT. This is what's tested. Everything that you studied in your undergraduate career, essentially, is what's tested on the MCAT. And in fact, you need to know that information and know that content at the level that it is taught at most major universities. I'm going to repeat that because people really don't get this. This is essentially a cumulative exam of everything you've covered in the last 4 years. Okay? And you need to know it at the level that most major universities teach it. And I'm not talking about your community college. So if you went to community college, forget about what they taught there because it probably wasn't at the level that they're talking about for the MCAT. We're talking Ivy League. If you can walk into an Ivy League course right now and get an A in, let's say, general chemistry, then you're prepared for the MCAT. If you can walk into a course right now at an Ivy League school, let's say first semester biochemistry, and get an A on that course right now, then you're prepared for the biochemistry that's tested on the MCAT. Okay? It's as simple as that. And a lot of people think that they can just read one prep book and then go take the test and be fine and think that they covered all the content. You did not cover all the content. You covered all the content, but you didn't understand the content. You didn't keep the content in your brain. You need that unconscious recall in order to do well on the MCAT. Really want to impress this upon you, okay? This is a more detailed slide about what's on the MCAT. You can feel free to read it for yourself. I'm just including it here for your reference. But one of the things that I really want you to appreciate about this slide is that just because the sections are labeled biochem, chem-phys, psych-soc, doesn't mean that you won't see, for example, biology in the physics section. In fact, it's very common for you to see biology in the physics section. It's very common for you to see biochemistry in the physics section. So this is a very integrative exam. It's not just going to be broken up into itty little bits the way that it seems to be broken up by the sections. It's not really true. I mean, the majority of what's covered in each section is what the title of the section is about, but the reality of it is you can see a passage that is heavily based in physics in the biochem section, for example. Okay, and you'll see that we'll have an example for you there. So this next slide, I'm really not going to go through this slide. This is kind of just for your information, right? In the interest of time, I just can't cover it here, but you can read up on this if you want. It is in fact the case that the AMC, the Association of American Medical Colleges, the people who make this exam, will actually very clearly delineate for you what's on the MCAT exam, and this is an example of that. Okay, and within each section, they'll give you foundational concepts. They'll give you subtopics of each foundational concept. And then they will, in fact, give you subtopics on those subtopics for you to know exactly what you need to study. In each one of our MCAT prep lectures, we will give you the AMC topic list so you know that we're covering everything that you need to know for that topic. But if you want to see that list, you can just click the link in the description box and you can check out what you need to see there. Now I'll give you an example of a question here. And I'll read it to you and then we can go over it, and this is just to give you an idea of what's on the MCAT. So, the mammalian cell membrane is the phospholipid bilayer with an inner leaflet and an outer leaflet. The average number of carbons in each leaflet is about 18 carbons, okay? 18 carbons long. These leaflets never overlap. If the average number of carbons in each hydrocarbon in a new species is 23 carbon, all else the same, how will this change the capacitance of the membrane? So I'll give you about 10 seconds to pause the video and answer, and then I'll go through it. Get out of your way. Okay, so why don't we go through this here. The answer is in fact B, and I'll go through why. So this is an example of a question where you're really asked about a basic physics concept, which is capacitance, in a rather novel situation. You're looking at a cell and being asked about capacitance. This question actually implies that the mammalian cell membrane acts as the capacitor, right? It does imply that. You didn't even have to know that. You didn't have to have any background knowledge to know that the mammalian cell membrane acts as a capacitor, because the question stem implies that. The question stem told us originally, in the original mammalian cell, the normal mammalian cell is about 18 carbons long, the hydrocarbon tails. So the hydrocarbon tails are the tails that come off of the glycerol backbone that make up then, in addition to the phosphate head group, the phospholipid bilayer, the functional unit of the phospholipid bilayer. We're told it's 18 carbons long. We're told the tails never overlap, and then the new species, they're 23 carbons long. So if you're thinking about the membrane as a capacitor, okay, what you need to do is take your basic physics concept, which is the equation to calculate the capacitance of a parallel plate capacitor, and apply that to this situation. In this situation, the phosphate head groups are going to be the parallel plates, okay? And the dielectric is going to be the hydrocarbon tails. And so if you increase the distance between the parallel plates, guess what? You decrease capacitance, okay? It would decrease, okay? So this is the kind of thing that you need to be able to deal with on the MCAT and be able to recognize, the basic concepts in foreign situations. Here's another example. We're not going to go through this one just in the interest of time. However, we do have a lecture doing this passage and answering the question, and you can feel free to go and check that lecture out at your leisure. Okay, it's out on YouTube. It's titled How to Approach Research-Based Passages, or you can click the link in our description box. So finally, what is test day like? Each section is 95 minutes, 59 questions, with a 10-minute break in between each section, and a 30-minute lunch break after 2 sections. There's no calculator on test day. Okay, and there's no equation sheet, right? No calculator, no equation sheet, everything from the brain. You come in there with almost nothing but the clothes on your back. Okay? You bring your own lunch, you bring your ID. What you're given is pencils, scrapbook, okay, desk and computer, and you must use what they provide. They want to make sure that nobody's cheating. This is the Prometric Test Center. This is the test center that your test center will look very much like this Prometric Test Center. It's a company that provides these testing centers for the MCAT test takers. Okay, typically the temperature is very controlled and very neutral and a good temperature to take your exam. The exam itself is a stressful day. I mean, you're pumped up with epinephrine and you're pumped up with cortisol. I mean, it's a very stressful day, generally speaking. But that's the MCAT test day. So we're gonna summarize here. The MCAT is a 7.5-hour passage-based multiple-choice exam directed towards measuring the intellectual ability and preparedness of U.S. medical school applicants. Essentially, what we're trying to do here, again, is to first and foremost, determine whether or not you are intelligent enough to become a physician, but second off, whether or not you're willing to put in the work required to become a physician. A good score can be defined in a number of ways. By general percentiles, namely, 90th percentile or better is generally speaking a good score, okay, or by matriculant data, looking at, whites and Asians, you're thinking about 510, pretty good score, a score that you'd be happy with and most likely get invited to a few interviews at medical schools. Black Latino, you're thinking about 503. By school, okay, we gave you the example of Harvard, Yale, and Brown, okay. You think about 517 for Brown and Yale, for Harvard and Yale, and 515 for Brown. Generally, the MCAT tests the following topics at the level they are taught at most major universities. And this is critical to your understanding of this whole entire lecture. I don't care if you remember anything else. I want you to remember and appreciate the fact that this is a hard exam. This is a cumulative exam of everything you covered for the last 4 years. And it's at the level, even more difficult than any other final that you took at those exams. Okay? You got first year general bio, okay, introductory biology, first year gen chem, first year organic chem essentially, but a very small amount of first year organic chem. First year physics, talking about first year introductory psychology, first year introductory sociology, first semester biochemistry, and mathematical concepts like doing mathematics in your head, long division, short division, etc., algebra 1 and 2, trig, probability, statistics, and basic mathematical calculations and estimations. And each section is divided is 95 minutes, 59 questions, okay, with 10-minute breaks in between each section and a 30-minute lunch break after 2 sections. Now remember, you can get between a score of 472 and 528, okay? 528 being the highest, 472 being the lowest. Remember that each section has essentially a bunch of passages and questions associated and based on that passage. Again, you're supposed to take your basic science concepts that you've memorized and know cold and apply them to foreign situations. You also have the CAR section, the critical analysis and the reading skills section, which is essentially a very similar to any standardized test that you've taken before. You get some passage and you're asked about that passage, what the author concluded, whether or not it was a good conclusion, a bad conclusion, whether or not he presented premises correctly, whether or not there was an inferential link between the premises and the conclusions. Taking things a step further, asking what the author's opinion might be on a new subject, those kind of questions. Okay? So that's that. Now we'll finally move on to why do so many people fail. So quote unquote fail. You can't actually fail the MCAT. It's just whether or not you get into medical school. And how should you prepare? So there are a few major reasons. 3 really major reasons why people don't do well on the MCAT. The first is that they do not actually study. That is, first and foremost, I would say about 95% of students who don't do well on the MCAT don't do well on the MCAT because they don't actually study. What they'll do is they'll pretend they study, and in their mind they think that they are somehow studying, but they're not. For example, if you go home today and you spend about 30 minutes studying before you pick up your phone, or you spend 30 minutes studying before you get on social media, you spend 30 minutes studying before you get up, or you have your phone out and using it the whole time that you're studying, you're not studying. You're not studying, okay? You need to put all those things away and really study and focus on what you're trying to do here. Our students at the MCAT Disciple study 8 hours a day. And we do that without any phone, without any social media involved, and we keep track of it using a time clock. Okay, we literally clock in and out every single day until we've clocked 8 hours. And that's how we make sure that we're staying on track, and I recommend that you do that as well. But this notion of, you get frustrated and you quit every 10 minutes, you're not going to do well on the MCAT that way. And you know what? The MCAT's breaking you. The MCAT is doing its job. Don't let it do its job, okay? Your entire goal in life, if you want to become a physician, is not to let the MCAT do its job. Okay. For the people who do actually study, which again, people who don't do well, it's very rare that the other reasons are for them. The reality is most people just don't actually study. They get overwhelmed with the mass amount of information on the MCAT and they just don't do it. But if they are studying, they may be studying the wrong way. There is a very systematic approach that we have at the MCAT Disciples, which is, listen, we read, we watch lecture, then we rewatch lecture over and over, and we practice. You should be doing it that way. If all you're doing is reading textbooks, then you're not going to do well on the MCAT. I mean, when have you ever done it that way? I mean, perhaps at community colleges, they do it that way because they don't record your lectures. But if you go to any higher institution, every Ivy League institution, and you talk to the students there, you go to any medical school and you talk to the students there, ask them how they study. You know what they'll say? They'll say, I watch the lectures over and over and over. And that is why we make our lectures into traditional style lectures, 90-minute lectures, so that you can watch them over and over and over, know everything you need to know, and be guided by a more knowledgeable person in order to make learning the content as easy as possible. And then the third real thing, and that really hinges upon the second thing, is that they don't have access to good teachers. If you have a good teacher, studying for the MCAT becomes a lot easier and more manageable. For example, our general chemistry series is about 9 lectures. And in those 9 lectures, we'll start from the bottom and work our way to the top, assuming you know absolutely nothing. If you learn these lectures, you'll do amazing on the MCAT. It takes about 16 hours to complete that series. Well, guess what? At the MCAT Disciples, we study 8 hours a day. That's going to take you 2 days to cover the entirety of general chemistry. It makes a huge difference to have the help of an MCAT prep company, especially a company like ours that puts so much time and effort into our students. These are the reasons people don't do well, right? They don't have access to good teachers. They aren't guided through the process correctly. If they are guided to the process correctly, it's not active enough. And that's another one of the reasons why we spend 30 hours with each and every student that we have. We want to make sure that you know that you're doing the right thing and you know that you have somebody by your side. Those are the reasons. I mean, I think our results are there. 89th percentile, that is an amazing average for an MCAT prep company to have, and I would love to be able to help you personally. I mean, love to talk. We can talk. Email us, lav@mcatdisciples.com. Visit our website, mcatdisciples.com. Facebook.com/mcatdisciples. We're at Instagram at the MCAT Disciples. Thank you for listening to this lecture. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it informative.